Again, Kathy Anderson, Master Food Preserver. I think you've heard my introduction, so I won't bother doing that again. Okay. It's not advancing.
Okay. She's not seeing her screen.
Okay, that's strange. We are.
No, I'm seeing my screen. I can't.
Can you hit the advance button down at the bottom?
There we go. Okay. Okay, is everybody with me now? I'm not sure I'm with me now, but hopefully we'll get there. Okay. So again, you want to start with the clean work area. And what we recommend is at first you disinfect your surfaces. Disinfecting by definition is a process where you use chemicals to clean germs, what I'm calling germs, bacteria, yeast, and mold in your kitchen. So disinfecting, we recommend using a tablespoon of bleach in 4 cups of water and make a fresh solution every day because the Clorox does tend to break down. To make it simple, you can go ahead and use Clorox wipes. And I did notice when I was at Costco last time that they are back in stock. So I think these are going to start to becoming available again. I know a lot of people don't like to use bleach and they use something like lemon or tea tree oil, but this is not going to disinfect your surfaces. So everything I'm going to cover today is in this publication. This is the drying, it's up on your screen, Drying Fruits and Vegetables. This is a publication that's put out by a group of universities in the Pacific Northwest, University of Idaho, Oregon State, and Washington State. So everything that I'm going to cover is in this book and quite a bit more in detail. This book you can download. If you go to Oregon State University, you'll pay $5 for the booklet, or you can go to Idaho and download it for free. So it's very handy reference, and I'll tell you a lot more than what I'm going to cover today. Another reference that I like to use, this is I call this my go-to how-to book. It talks about chapters on all aspects of food preservation and in a lot of detail. It even has like a handy dandy section on frequently asked questions, and even a troubleshooting guide, like if your jelly doesn't set, what can you do about that? What are some of the possible problems? So very handy. And this is available online through the University of Georgia, and which is where our National Center for Home Food Preservation is located. So we have a website, and this is a screenshot of some of the topics that come up when you click on drying. So you can see this will help you choose things like a food dehydrator, making fruit leathers, and then there's other PDFs that you can download from different universities. So very good site to have. Okay, so to get into the topic, drying is probably the oldest method of food preservation, and how it works. What we're trying to do in food preservation is to preserve the quality from a taste and texture point of view, but also we want to stop the actions of microorganisms. And specifically, we're usually talking about bacteria, yeast, and molds. There's so much moisture that's removed when you're drying that really the bacteria and yeast can't grow. If you do tend to under dry a little bit, the microorganism that you're going to have trouble with really is mold. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Drying can also slow down the enzymes, and I'm going to talk about this later and why this is important in food preservation. And on my screen here, there's a picture I took of from Joshua Tree National Park a couple years ago, and it shows an old storage container that these people use to store their dried food in. Okay, now getting into why dry. There's so many reasons to dry, and I'll cover many of these, but one thing I think, one of the reasons I dry, if you look on your screen, I dry simply because it's pretty. I enjoy it. I have my jars lined up on my counter behind me. I just think they look nice. One of the reasons you can do it is when you come into some abundance, whether from your garden, your neighbor's garden, farmer's market, whatever it might be, it gives you an additional way to preserve the food. So drying can be in addition to your other methods of food preservation. For example, there's only so much peach jam you can put away, but maybe you want to try doing some peach leathers to preserve. So it gives you an additional way to preserve. Another plus is saving storage space and weight. And this is an important one for me, because one of the reasons I got into dehydrating is we travel a lot in our RV. And when I call it an RV, it's being a little bit generous because it's actually the camper on the back of a truck. And we go for a couple months at a time. And in that small space, space and weight are both at premium. So I find that dehydrating food is a good way for me to go to use on our trips. Now you can also save money. What's shown here is some super greens. These are the ones on the left you can buy at Amazon, and you get a little under an ounce for $28. On the right are some power greens that I bought from Costco for $5 that yielded a little over 2 ounces of dried material. So save quite a bit of money. It's also cheaper to save money when you're home dehydrating versus buying commercially dehydrated foods. And one of the things that I want to talk about, you also save money, say, compared to something like refrigeration or freezing, because there's really no ongoing storage costs for dried food. So yet another advantage. I think we've all become aware lately of the fact that the food chain, our supply chains to our grocery stores are vulnerable to disruption. So it's a good idea to have some emergency food on hand for things like when you face empty shelves at the supermarket. It's also nice to have a source that's not power dependent, like for example, our poor friends in Texas that recently had to endure that long power outage with the food in their refrigerators was no longer good, but you know, maybe they could salvage a little something in the freezer. So drying is a good way to preserve food for emergencies. Drying is very simple, relatively simple. There's only 3 things that you really need. First is a source of low heat. So you want enough heat to draw the moisture out of the product, but you don't want to end up cooking the food. You need low humidity so that when the moisture is drawn from the food, it has a place to be released, and then air circulation to move that process along and carry off the moisture. There's a couple multiple methods of dehydrating. What I'm going to talk about today specifically are electric dehydrators, and there's a couple different kinds of models of these. This first one here, this Excalibur, if you can see here, and I have it here behind me, this is a horizontal airflow machine, and this is a stackable kind, and this is a vertical airflow. Both work very well, depends on your preferences, your budget, and that sort of thing. If your oven goes low enough, and by this I mean 140 degrees, which my oven will not do, I can't dry in my oven, you can dry, but if it's over that, you're going to end up cooking more than you are drying. If you do decide you have an oven you can use, you decide to use it for dehydrating, you want to prop open the door and maybe put a little fan in front of it to help that air circulate. You can also use a convection oven, which has a kind of a built-in fan. There's also solar dehydrators. You can get plans for these online, and the one that I'm showing on the screen is available for something around $370. So certainly not a cheap option for that solar dehydrator. You can also dry with the sun and the air, like for example, tying up herbs and flowers. I do a lot of drying like that. One thing you do not want to use is a microwave. The only exception to this is if you have a small amount of herbs, because the microwave will cook and not dry. So let's get into some useful tools. I'm going to be drinking throughout this presentation raspberry water that I made with my powdered raspberries. Very delicious, fruity, no sugar. So you want uniform thin pieces for even drying. So what I'm showing here is 2 slices of oranges. The top one is an 1/8-inch slice, which is about roughly 3 millimeters. And the bottom one is a 1/4-inch slice, which is about a little over 6 millimeters. You can do this with a knife in theory. For me personally, I can't cut anything with a knife for dehydrating except for bananas. It's the only thing I seem to be able to cut. So for all my projects, I use a mandolin, and there's one shown here. With a mandolin, this is another kind that I have, and you just simply use this food pusher to move the food over, like in this case, this V-shaped blade, and cut it into uniform slices. The problem with mandolins is that you can have accidents and cut yourself. We even have a master food preserver in our group who had to have stitches with a mandolin accident. So one thing I definitely recommend is a safety glove, and I'm going to talk about that. This, as it's shown here, and I have it here, this is a stainless steel mesh. This is the kind you really want to be safe with using a mandolin. And what I do when I use it is I put a disposable glove over it so it keeps it clean while I'm using it. There's another kind of glove. When I first started getting into dehydrating, it said about safety gloves. So I went online and this is what I found. These are like a high fiber blend glove, and these are not really for mandolins, because as you can see on my glove here, I did manage to cut the tip off on one of the fingers, and that's when I switched to the stainless steel mesh glove. They're not that expensive. This glove was under $20, maybe $17, $18, which is a lot cheaper than my copay at the emergency room, not to mention pain and suffering. So stainless steel mesh gloves are the way to go. Now talking about sheets, you don't have to have sheets, but if you have something very small pieces or liquids, you will have to use them. They vary in price and different qualities. The 2 main kinds that you can use are the silicone type, and I have some examples here shown in the picture. It's thin and kind of floppy. This is a raised edge one, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. And then also this, which is probably the one I use the most often. It's a mesh, and it lets the air movement through so you can have good drying, and it's a breeze to clean up and catches the small pieces. You can also use these Teflon types. This is a kind that came with my Excalibur dehydrator, or I bought it with the Excalibur dehydrator. These are fairly pricey, but work very well. I bought some of these less expensive Teflon style of sheets, and the problem I had with this one is when it's in my dehydrator and the fan's blowing, it's so thin, it just flaps, makes a flapping noise. It drives me crazy. So I had to hold it down with some paper clips. Those types of mats can be cut to fit your dehydrator, whatever style that you have. You can also use just regular parchment paper. This is probably your cheapest option and works very well. The thing you don't want to use is wax paper for obvious reasons. You don't want to have wax on your food. There's another kind of silicone sheets out there. This is this kind. These sheets are reinforced with woven fiberglass. So if you cut these, you can contaminate your food, any of your surfaces in your kitchen. You can even breathe in small plastic and glass particles. So definitely anything with a mesh in it, a fiber in it like that, you do not want to cut. It's not safe. Okay, this is what I call my game changer sheet. I was very happy when I found these. These tend to be a little pricey, but for me, they were worth it. They have this raised edge, this lip on the sheet, so that when you pour your puree on, you don't have to worry about it gooping over and falling all over the, dripping all over the dehydrator. So before I had these, I used my little Teflon sheets, but I only used a cup per tray because I wanted to avoid any spillage. So with these sheets, I can use 2 cups per tray and then basically double my production that way and the kind of effort that I have to put in. So I thought these were very worthwhile, but again, pricey. So there is a hack for that. You can make your own kind of a tray, just like shown here, where you use a paper clip and hold the sides and make your own lipped edge sheet. So when you're doing any food processing, you always want to select quality produce. And one thing that's important here is you want to wash it in running water. And the reason is a lot of people run a sink full, put it in the sink. Well, first of all, your sink is one of the germiest places in your kitchen, so you don't want to contaminate your food. And then if some of your produce has other microorganisms on it, they can be spread to the other food in the sink. So make sure you use running water and don't soak them. Another step you can take is pre-treating your produce to get a better quality. And I'm going to talk about 2 methods of doing that now. In the drying fruits and vegetable book, it talks about pre-treatments of fruits that tend to darken, when they're exposed to air, like apples. So I always like to test out what they're saying and learn for myself. This is a Fuji apple that I cut, and I left it unpeeled and uncored. Personal preference, just what I like. I like that little star shape in the middle of the apple slice. But on the left side, you can see there was no pre-treatment done there, and that's just a natural browning. Doesn't really bother me, and it doesn't affect the taste. But these other 3 treatments yielded a much prettier product, much lighter. I used lemon juice and vitamin C and a product called Fruit Fresh, which is a proprietary product, and it's basically a combination of the acids that you find in the lemon juice and the vitamin C. So these work equally well. If you choose to use a pre-treatment for your fruit color, any of those options, and there are others listed in your publication that will help you. For vegetables, one of the most important things you can do for quality is blanching. And blanching we use whether we're freezing or drying the vegetables. So what this does, it inactivates those enzymes I talked about a little earlier that lead to quality loss. So what is an enzyme? It's a chemical in your food, naturally present, that keep working in the produce after it's harvested. And it can cause changes and deterioration, like in the texture, your food will soften, those carrots get a little rubbery, things like that. By blanching, you inactivate those enzymes and preserve quality. So what you do when you want to blanch is you look up your vegetable on a chart, and it is in your drying book. We'll tell you how long to do it. This is an example using asparagus, and you can see that you retain better color in the blanched versus the unblanched product. Basically, you just plunge it into boiling water for a length of time. For asparagus, the recommendation is 2 to 4 minutes, depending on how big it is. So you put it in the boiling water for the time, and then you quick plunge it into a ice water bath to stop the, to take the heat out and cool the product down. This is an important step. This is what we call conditioning. And typically it's done with fruits. Definitely we're always recommended for fruits because they are at a higher percentage of moisture than your dried vegetables. Dried fruit's usually about 20% moisture, whereas vegetables are closer to 10. When you dry something, put it on a tray, there's going to be uneven amount of moisture in the pieces when you're done. So what conditioning does is equalize that moisture in your food so that it can reduce the risk of mold. And here's some peppers that I air dried for a couple of months in the hot California climate, but I did have them in a paper bag, so they really didn't dry thoroughly. I didn't condition them, I just put them in a container, and I got this nice mold growth. I was kind of happy so I could take a picture of it, but anyway, I should have conditioned those, and then I would have found out I had a problem. Conditioning is very easy. All you need is a glass or a plastic container with a tight fitting lid. A mason jar works well for this. These other two containers are ones that I got at the dollar store, very inexpensive and useful for large amounts. So you want to loosely pack your food in there because you want to be able to shake this for 2 to 4 days to see that will be enough time to see if any condensation is going to develop inside of the jar or the container, and that's what you watch for. You want to make sure you put cooled food into these because, as you know, you put warm food in the container, you get the condensation. So our how-to go-to, the So Easy to Preserve book, says it's really not necessary for vegetables. I did want to point out that the only other time I did have mold develop in a product was some San Marzano tomatoes, which I thought, well, I don't have to condition them. They're vegetables, according to the government, and they should be fine. Now I go ahead, I condition everything, vegetables, fruit, whatever. It's so easy, and if you put so much work into getting to the point of conditioning that you don't want to lose it all just to mold. Excuse me. So now we're going to talk about making leathers, barks, and powders. So first of all, what is a leather? It's basically pureed fruits or vegetables that you dry in very thin sheets, typically at 140 degrees for about 6 to 8 hours. These are so easy to make. You can make them from fresh products or canned or frozen.
Kathy?
Yes?
We had a question about conditioning, and I think it's something that we all would like to know. What do you do if you do see water while you're conditioning?
If you see water forming, you want to go ahead and re-dry that food because it won't be shelf stable and won't store well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so in this presentation, I use frozen and canned foods because I happen to be where I live. I'm in the middle, in between gardening seasons, between my winter and summer garden. So these are products that I could use to preserve right now. No pre-treatments necessary. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's all done for you. It's very quick and easy. And I know some people don't care for canned or frozen products, but actually a lot of times these have more nutritional value than fresh produce because these go pretty much from the field to being processed versus being shipped and held at the store and then in your home. So really they are good options. Here's some of the products I used. I did want to point out here that I did not blend the pumpkin, the canned pumpkin, or the tomato paste. I just thinned those down a little bit, the tomato paste, and spread them out. And when you're doing a lot of different flavors of making fruit roll-ups or fruit leathers, I put a piece of plastic wrap between the blender and the top, and you don't have to clean the top so often. So you blend it, and you want to pour equal amounts onto each sheet. And the reason this is important is that they all dry roughly at the same time. And you want it about an eighth of an inch thick. And I read one publication that says spread it out and then, 1/8 inch thick thick with a little thicker around the edges. Well, good luck on that. That is just very difficult to do. So just do the best you can. It's going to come out a little different every time. You can add, if you're doing something like an apricot from fresh where the fruit might tend to darken, or apples, you can add a little lemon or citrus juice to lighten the color. And you can have some fun. You can combine flavors like a strawberry kiwi, or you can add sweeteners, spices, or extracts. One thing a lot of people like are pumpkin leathers with pumpkin pie spice, some cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves. You can add toppings like the ones I have here. Here I made an apricot with some coconut sprinkles on it, and then some chocolate leather with which I just add cocoa to applesauce, and haven't made it again though, just so you know, with nuts and coconut on it. Lots of options. I also like to make a strawberry chia seed leather that I think is good. Personal preference. So the other important question is, so when is it done? You want to test this after it cools a little bit. Everything when it comes out is going to be more pliable than it is when it's a little more dry. So let it cool. So on the case of fruit leather, this is dry when it's pliable, like leather, which is why they call it fruit leather. But your vegetable leather, as I said, that's down to about 10% moisture. And it just gets real, it doesn't have as much sugar to keep it pliable. And it is a very brittle or crisp, crunchy texture to that. One thing that you can do to both act as an extender and also add to make your fruit leather more pliable is applesauce. So you can do that as a standalone, but also add it to other things like your blueberries, and it just makes it a more pliable texture for a fruit roll-up leather. I mainly go by physical qualities. Pulling easily off the mat. You can see here where it's peeling back. And when you get to that point and you have some wet spots, you can just pick the whole thing up and put it right on your tray. If you have a fruit leather and you fold it together, it doesn't stick. Sometimes it doesn't come off or peel as easily as you would like, even on the silicone sheet. So sometimes you need to help it along and get it off there with a spatula. You want to roll the fruit leathers while they're still warm and pliable. Now these keep for about a month at room temperature. They don't really last that long around my house, but theoretically that's how long they last. Or you can refrigerate or freeze them if you want to store them for longer amounts of time. I have a friend who makes leathers that with pre-measured amounts of garlic, onions, peppers, and tomatoes, and then she just throws that in when she's making a sauce or something else, and it's already ready in a recipe ready amount. If you do this, you go a little over, because drying does go faster towards the end. If it's too dry to roll, one thing you can do is, make powders. That's a great thing. Or if you do want you want to be able to roll it, I have tried this, you can rehydrate it slightly, but what you don't want to do, you put a damp paper towel over it. What you don't want to do is to have that paper towel touching it. When I did that I learned not to do that from another time when I put the paper towel on, and it just became very sticky and kind of slimy. So just don't touch it with the paper towel.
Hi, Kathy.
Yes.
We had a question about testing to know when it's time to. Somebody asked, how can you roll fruit leather when it's warm if you have to let it cool to test it?
This is well, you only have to let one cool a little bit. With the fruit leathers, if you can pull them up, you can go ahead and roll them.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So let me see. Okay, one thing I did want to say here is that when you use thinner plastic wrap, like a saran wrap, for example, I have a lot of problems with those for kids or seniors. It might be hard to undo. I found if you use the heavier freezer wrap, it works a lot better to use with your fruit roll-ups. So if you see this, when you pull it up, you're always going to have a little bit of uneven drying. Just throw it back in and dry it a little longer. You can look on different charts and see recommended drying guidelines. For example, here you can see that apples can go anywhere from 6 to 12 hours. So the point is that the time is going to vary. There's a lot of factors. What are the size of the pieces, how moist it was to start with, how humid it is, these sorts of things. You really want to go by the physical qualities that I talked about. And if you're not sure, dry it longer and make sure to condition after drying. And I did want to say, when I was first learning, because I know there are some people on here, I saw someone said they just got a new dehydrator, so yay for you. When you're learning, I always let it go like maybe overnight and then check it again so that I knew for sure when it was dry. And then I became familiar with the physical properties, you know, how brittle it was or so forth, doing it that way. So kind of teach yourself. And one thing about drying, there's a lot of trial and error involved, and you're going to know a lot more down the line than you do now. You learn practically every time you do something. It's a lot of fun. So what's bark? I put this in here because I'm seeing this term show up more on some of the camping and backpacking websites that I follow. This is essentially a backpacking term, and it means flakes or of these brittle sheets, like flakes or shards, different people call them. Usually it's a starchy food like a potato or sweet potato, and you use this to make your trail meals. You can also eat this as it is. So here's some examples. This is a spicy vegetable broth base that I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And here's some pumpkin bark. Now we're going to talk about powders. The thing about powders is they just offer amazing concentrated flavors. So these are things that they're not going to taste like the kind of spices and so forth that you get in the grocery store. They're going to have a lot more flavor. One of my favorite ones is this one right here. This is my mushroom powder. These are fun to dry. They dry pretty quickly and they feel like styrofoam. So they're real easy, very light, real easy to powder up. But this gives a very deep kind of umami flavor. You can add it to your gravies or sauces. And these are the kind of things that making your own gives you a lot more flexibility and give you more opportunities to have fun in the kitchen. Now that I started making these vegetable powders and using them, I can actually make a hummus that tastes good. So what are powders? Powders are just ground up dehydrated leathers. When I did this, when I was getting ready for this presentation, I made about 7 different ones and I cut them in half. Some I used and made fruit roll-ups with. The rest went back in the dehydrator. I dried them more because if you're making a powder, you want it drier than you do when you're making a fruit roll-up. And once it's dry, you can go ahead and dehydrate it. If it's too moist, it will not grind and you will not be able to make a powder out of it. So these are the 7 powders that I made, just showing you how pretty the colors are and how how nice they look. When you're trying to make a powder, you really want to look at or even just for any kind of a fruit roll-up, you want to look at your puree consistency. You want it spreadable, but not real runny. And it's really ideal if you can just kind of tilt your tray and spread it around. That doesn't happen all the time, so that's the ideal. You just do the best you can. If it's too thick, you can thin it down. I know it just kills you to add moisture to stuff that you're going to put in the dehydrator, but a lot of times it'll give you a better product because you'll have a more even layer and more even drying.
Kathy, we had a question about what's the shelf life of powders?
Okay, the shelf life of powders, it's just going to be in, I keep mine around for months. So if you look at them and you smell them or taste them, you can see when they're losing their potency. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in a couple of places, is I only dehydrate or powder. When I dehydrate, I keep it in larger pieces, and then I just powder the small amounts I need, because you're basically turning that into more surface area for moisture or oxygen to act on. So they don't last as long as the same leathers in larger pieces. And it's basically, since if there's no mold, they're safe. And when you would decide to keep them or not would depend on the quality, and that's a personal choice.
Thank you.
Question? Okay. You can see here if it's too runny on the right side there, that was a little too thin, and I just ended up with a mess. I was still able to powder it, but that was just not fun to do. And also when you have real powdery pieces and you open your dehydrator, make sure you always turn the fan off before you open your dehydrator. You're going to get a shower of powder sometimes. Anyway, if that had been cooked down, it wouldn't have been so runny. It would have been a much better product. So to make powders, there's any number of ways. Typically for small amounts, this is what I always usually do, is I just use a coffee grinder. Here I'm using, making some powders out of bell peppers, and I don't always want a fine powder. Sometimes you want more chunky pieces. So something like just using a plastic bag and a rolling pin will get you where you want to be with that product. Here I'm using, the next picture, using a mortar and pestle for some orange powder. And then when I have occasion to do large amounts, you can actually use a blender as well. Once you powder them, you're going to sift them and then regrind and repeat that until you get the desired size. Again, I kept, like in the center picture there, you can see those little tomato chunks. You know, I kept those because I actually like those size of pieces. So again, personal preference. This is a great little tool, little artist paintbrush to get all the bits of the powder out of your grinder or however you're doing it, because, you know, let's face it, you got a lot of time invested at that point, and you want to make sure you get the most that you can. Powdering can, especially using a blender or grinder, is going to add moisture. So it needs to be dried again for safe storage. Here, I'm showing you where I dried large amounts in the oven. So what you do is you turn your oven on to the lowest setting and turn it off. Put your cookie sheets in with your powder, and then you dry it for about 15 to 20 minutes. You can do smaller amounts. You can dry them in the dehydrator. So again, word of caution here, you need to contain the powder so it's not blown around by the fan, or you'll just end up with you know, of course, a powdery mess in your dehydrator. You can do a couple of things. I've worked out to do is the covered up with my mesh netting, or use a deeper bowl like this little Pyrex bowl to dry it, so the fan will go over top of the bowl and not spread the powder around. Clumping will happen. If you have powders, you will have clumping. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is just the compression, just pressing together, or maybe it absorbed a little moisture, or even sometimes the sugars. So you can if it's a real problem, you can regrind it and redry it, or you can add just a little bit of arrowroot powder to keep it flowing. But I normally don't do that, but it is an option if it's a product that you would want a little powder in. Again, I leave them in the larger bark pieces, so to speak, or shards, and then I just powder the amount that I need at one time. Now you can also make powders with dried fruits that are dried to you know, very dry state, not just the pliable ones that you buy commercially. I wanted to put this slide in because in the So Easy to Preserve, it says that citrus fruits are not recommended for drying. And this is one of my favorite dry products. I slice my oranges about a 1/4 inch thick and dry them till they're brittle and they kind of snap. They make a delicious snack. They taste great. Put them in your, iced tea or whatever you want. You can grind them up into a powder, and orange powder on vanilla ice cream is just really great. So it says not recommended for drying. The recommendation is not based on food safety. It's more what the author saw as a food quality issue. Again, that's going to be something that's a little bit of personal preference, and just go with trial and error. If you want to try it and just see what happens and figure out, as long as it's dried safely according to the guidelines in your book, you can try it. So what do you do with these powders? So for example, on a tomato powder, you have a recipe, say, that calls for 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. So you scoop that out, and then you put the can in the refrigerator, and then you forget about it, and you end up throwing it out with all the mold that's on it, sometime later. This way there's no waste. So that's another way dehydrating saves you money. And you can simply rehydrate it to make a thick paste at a 1-to-1, or if you want to use it to make a sauce, you can use a 4-to-1.
Kathy, we had a question on the citrus. Somebody asked, why do lemons turn so brown and bitter when they're dehydrated?
Okay, I definitely am with you on that one, which I think is kind of funny. These are my lemons. They're dark and they do taste just fine. Which I think is kind of funny, since you put lemon juice on to preserve the color. But anyway, these do darken more than just about anything I've tried. And the bitter part really comes from the peel. When my grandkids eat, like same with the oranges, that outer part, that flavito is bitter. And so they want me to break the outside edges off when they eat it. So that's the 2 things. If you want to powder citrus and you don't want the bitter with it, then I would, I have not tried it where you just peel it and then say puree it and make a leather of it that way without any of the flavito in it. But you can also, what I did when I made a powder was they're easy to snap off that outer edge. I just wanted to make a little bit to try it. And that's how I got around the bitterness.
Okay, thank you. The person who asked that question had done it with Meyer lemons, and she peeled them. So,
I don't have an answer for. That's just been, I just answered the question from my experience with the products that I dried. And I did also, I think those, I did dry Meyer lemon, and bitter perceptions also something, but maybe that's why they don't recommend it for drying. But for me, I don't have that bitter problem with it.
Us old people would remember a song called Lemon Tree is so pretty, the lemon flower is sweet, but the fruit of the poor lemon tree is impossible to eat.
I like them, but all right. So if you don't find a rehydration conversion online, you just note what you made and then what's left, the before and after. So if I'm looking, for this can of pumpkin, I dehydrated it down to, basically a little about half the volume. I might want to try a little under 1-to-1 to make the product I want, or just keep adding a little water to get what you want. So that's one way. There's a couple different ways to be able to reconstitute the powders. When you package these, you want to package them in glass or plastic. Again, moisture proof, airtight. You don't want them to reabsorb moisture. And again, if you just dry what you need or small amounts, then you're less likely to have any problems with moisture or clumping. In general, dried food storage times are recommended range from 4 months to 1 year. It depends on how they're packaged and the storage conditions. So the best way is under cool, dark, and dry conditions and airtight containers. That's going to give you your longest shelf life. Again, if without a mold consideration, what it comes down to is a quality consideration. And I was reading a publication from the University of Utah or Utah State, and it said, you know, if you're hungry, even food that's not of peak quality will be all right. So again, but in general, the higher the temperature, the shorter the storage time. So for example, where I live in California, I don't want to store this in my garage where it's hot, because it will not keep at peak quality for a very long period of time. Okay, now I get the questions about these little packets and what to do with these. These are food safe desiccant packs, and you want to make sure they are food safe. These absorb moisture. The only time you really need to use these is in foods that you open frequently, if you're in and out of the jar. For example, this is our powdered greens that we use every day, and I keep moisture desiccant pack in there to keep it drier. These change color when they're full of moisture. They'll look different when they're okay and absorbing moisture, and when they're dry. So you just read it when you buy it. You read on the back of the package, and you can reactivate them according to the directions on the package. There is information you can get. Okay, it was Utah State. This I downloaded for free, and it has a lot more information on food storage. So what do I do with my dried product? And this is where, for me, the adventure begins, because once it's dry, you can use it in all kinds of ways. There's no need for tested and approved recipes. And if you've been to our programs before, you know that this is something we're really feel is important. Is for safe canning, you need to follow tested and approved recipes. You don't want to use your great aunt's recipe or your grandma's recipe. They may have gotten away with it, but it only takes one case of botulism, to kind of ruin your day. So really use safe. These recipes have been tested under laboratory conditions and will not support growth of microorganisms, and specifically we worry about botulism. And as I'm going to show you, drying is not just for food. An easy use is in soups, stews, and casseroles, because these already have a lot of moisture in them. Powders don't dissolve instantly. These foods need to absorb moisture to rehydrate to be able to use. So obviously a soup or stew is a great place to use them, because you'll have the extra moisture. You can add them to baked goods, put them in your cookies, scones, your frosting. Here I added my different frostings. I made frosting from these different powders and then sprinkled a little bit of the powders on top of them. I took these to a party, and they are really a big hit. They have a very fresh, fruity flavor, but without the, again, without the added sugar. You can add here's our pancake mix we like, throw in some pumpkin powder, and you end up with these delicious pumpkin pancakes. They have a beautiful color, and I would suspect some more nutrients too as well, maybe some vitamin A. Definitely an improvement in the flavor. That's another way to use your products. Salts and sugars. I made this Himalayan pink salt, and I use rose petals, but you can't taste the rose petal. The only reason I did that was basically to have a kind of a pretty salt. In the center there, you can see a raspberry dusting sugar that people put on their dessert products. Mixing the raspberry powder in just gives it a lot more color, and then certainly a lot more flavor. And then on the right is rosemary lemon sea salt, where I dehydrated the rosemary and also the lemon zest, and made a delicious, more of a product for a savory food there, the rosemary lemon. This is one of the really fun things to do with this, is create your own flavors, your own seasonings. This is one of my favorites that I use regularly. It's dried tomato, and I don't use the powder in this. I like kind of the larger pieces. caramelized onion, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and Aleppo peppers and bell peppers. And I use this, you can mix it with cream cheese, really good in hummus, or to spread with your mayonnaise or dips or whatever. I noticed when I put a lot of this in with my hummus that it changes texture a little bit. It becomes a little clumpier instead of smooth because I use so much and it absorbed quite a bit of moisture. So take that into consideration. You might want to thin it out if it's not the, with a little water or broth or something, if it's not the texture that you want. Here's a bagel topped with some of that cream cheese, that seasoned cream cheese. The grandkids also like it with a strawberry cream cheese. You can use your seasonings too to create things like delicious salad dressings. Okay, this is what I would call special mention product here. This is caramelized onion. So basically I took 10 pounds of onions, sliced them up, and if you prefer a minced product, just go ahead and cut them that way. I cooked them for hours on low in a crock pot, and you just do it until they're the way you like them. And as you know, probably from your other cooking, that caramelized onions give you that oniony flavor, but with like a sweetness to it, and really delicious. And since drying concentrates all the flavors, this is a concentrated flavor that works well in so many things. So from those 10 pounds of onions, I've got basically 1 3/4 quart jars of dried onions that I can use in anything, and a quart of onion juice, which is delicious. And I used it to make another favorite product. This is vegetable bark base. In this case, I made a spicy version to put in with my soups and other meals that you know, that we eat on the when we're traveling. Put in all the vegetables, cook it down, blend it up, make a leather out of it, and then this is the product that I end up with. And that onion juice, that quart of onion juice, really gives it a great flavor. You can also make some sweet treats. Here's some vanilla ice cream with some peach powder, and when the grandkids come over, we happen to have ice cream, they like to pick the powder that they're going to get to sprinkle on their ice cream, so that's a lot of fun for them. I also tried some chocolate dipped orange slices, and here's where, and they are, you know, definitely have a little bitter flavor to them, and I thought it was a nice balance actually with the dark chocolates, the sweetness of the dark chocolate. And on the right there are some, what I call trail power bites with some added raspberry powder for, you know, definitely a good shot of flavor. Obviously, we talked about this, healthy and tasty snacks, dried fruit, like these persimmons, one of my favorite products to dehydrate these fuyus. Barks, or I mean these leathers here, also hummus dips, or you can even just sprinkle it over your yogurt, just whatever your imagination can take you. These are some chips I made, and there's one missing on the one on the left there because my husband grabbed one before I could get the picture. But you can make your own chips. There's a lot of, or crackers, whatever. There's a lot of recipes online for you to try, but great way to get what you want when you dehydrate. You can add all kinds of flavor, as I talked about, nutrients and varieties to your meal. So I use my apple powder and put it with some cinnamon on my oatmeal. This is my spicy hummus on a bean burger, which really kind of tastes great. And here's some caramelized onions that I rehydrated in boiling water. Then my husband had them on his moose burger, and they were really good, he said. Here's my San Marzano tomatoes, one of my favorite dried products. And one way I love to use them is in greens with garlic and onion for just some delicious flavor. This is the powders we use in our smoothies. I talked a little bit about the green powder, but I also made some beet powder, and I made this out of a canned product. I rinsed it really, really well. It's already pre-cut into the sizes and works out really well to make a powder out of canned beets, just adding nutrition. I know a lot of people use their powders if they're making green powder, they'll use it to add to the food that their kids are eating and just sneak a little bit of green and fiber and nutrients into their foods. You can also use them in beverages, herbal teas like these peppermint or lemon ginger teas that I made with some lemon slices. In the middle is something that's just delicious, a raspberry flavored water that I poured boiling water over and then iced down. It gives you a really nice fruit flavor without the sugar. And on the right there is apparently a favorite of my husband and the guys at the Duck Club. They like to put a dried orange slice in their bourbon. Don't know how that tastes. You can add boiling water to your dry products, make a quick meal. Again, that's what we do traveling. We have little thermoses that we do this in. You can also do it just at home when the kids want something quick to eat. You don't have time to make something. You can do something like this. It's ready in 20 minutes usually, or 30, depends on the product. I did want to include this because we were talking about emergency supplies. This is an easy way to build your pantry because you can take frozen vegetables and put them directly into your dehydrator. You don't have to defrost them or anything. And this is what I call about as close as you can get to instant gratification with dehydrating, because there's no work to it, and it's so easy, and you get a lot of product. Here's some gifts. I made these gifts to commemorate a garden season. We had our first garden season last year, so made some pumpkin and tomato powder, some of the salt I talked about, lemons and the tea bags, and also a loofah soap bar, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. These
Kathy,
are the flour. Yes.
Before you go on, somebody had a question I think we all kind of want to know. It says, when you're rehydrating the fruit powders into juice, does it have to be boiling water?
That's what I did, and I've only done it a few times. I don't know. Actually, for this one, I did do some boiling water. I didn't really like the color, so I put some more in, and it did work well. The thing that it's not going to happen is you're going to get a little sediment on the bottom because, again, it's not an instant dissolve. So, yeah, I did it today. I put some into some cold water. It did work great.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, pointing that out. So these are my loofah soap bars, my dried flower petals that I dried from our garden flowers last summer, put them in the bottom of the mold, put the loofah in, which I also grew, in 1-inch slices, and then poured just the melt and pour soap over it. And this is a great product and, of course, really beautiful. This was something I did a few years ago when I first started dehydrating. I made these individually wrapped bite-sized pieces of fruit for the grandkids for their stocking stuffers. Only thing I'd say about this is a crazy grandma thing to do. It's fun for about the first 12 hours, but after that gets a little tedious. So this was a one-off, won't be doing this again, but it was fun and they really did enjoy. They put these in their lunch boxes and saw which sticker they got that day, and they did enjoy them. So that was fun. I also did a lot of decorating for Christmas with my dried citrus. They think they really look pretty, kind of translucent, like a stained glass or something when you put them up against water. So I used them throughout my house. My house smelled good. For example, here I glued a star anise onto the citrus, looked really pretty. And the price was right in decorating my tree this year. And you can also do fun craft projects with kids. In addition to fruit leathers, kids really like to make fruit leathers. And here we are painting our salt dough ornaments. So to summarize, these are some of the reasons. I covered most of these throughout this talk. One thing I did want to kind of point out was supporting dietary choices. So for example, if you're on a salt restricted diet or you have food allergies, you can use some of your powders to create flavors that won't aggravate allergies and that don't add any sodium to your diet, just things like that. So if you want to contact the Master Food Preservers here in San Joaquin County, here's our contact information. You can go to our website and sign up for our blog, or you can follow us on Facebook. And we have a little motto here, the Master Food Preservers, and it's preserve today and relish tomorrow. So thank you, and I hope that you learned something from this presentation today.
Okay. Got lots of nice comments, Kathy. And let's see. I answered yes, because I have done it, but somebody asked about making a fruit leather out of persimmons.
I made a fruit leather out of persimmons. I made it out of not the Fuyu persimmons because they're just too good dried, but I did try some with hychias. I didn't like the texture that much. You know how when you're waiting for them to soften, sometimes you know they're not as soft enough. So I added some applesauce to it to kind of extend it and make it pliable and so on. And because the persimmon was such a mild flavor, I ended up actually tasting the applesauce, which I usually don't. But it did make a decent product with the hychias. So I would just, if you're interested in that, just play with it and come up with something, seasonings or whatever that you want to add and try it yourself.
Okay. I'm not seeing any new questions. I'm just seeing lots of thank you and how much they enjoyed the presentation. Somebody wanted to know about making a fruit leather out of passion fruit juice. I don't know what. I think you could make a leather out of just about everything, except the passion fruit is very watery. So.
Well, again, I actually am growing a passion vine right now that I hope will fruit this year, and I'm going to have a better answer for that, hopefully by the end of the summer. And I would say yes, of course, if it's something that's more watery, you would probably just want to cook it down so it wouldn't be too thin to spread in your tray. But I certainly am going to be trying that if, in fact, I can get some, get my passion vines to make fruit.
Yeah,
Again,
I made jelly out of them last year. They were really good.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I don't see any new questions. So I'm thinking, unless you have something else you want to add.
No, I would say just jump into it. You really can't mess anything up, and just have fun and enjoy the process.